Hello and welcome to a special recording of the Energy Gang podcast for PACENation here at the Citibank headquarters in New York City. I'm Ed Crooks. I'm the Vice Chair of the Americas for Wood Mackenzie and also the host of the Energy Gang podcast. And it's a great pleasure to be joined here by my guests, Laura Rapaport, who's the CEO of Northbridge, which is a specialist in CPACE financing. Hi, Laura.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Great of you to join us. Thanks very much indeed. And also, it's a great pleasure to welcome Professor Suhail Tayeb, who is a clinical assistant professor at NYU's Schack Institute of Real Estate. And you're also the chair of NYU's Sustainable Real Estate Conference, aren't you?
I am. Thank you for having me, Ed.
Thanks very much for being here. Great talking to you. So, as I said, we're recording this. This is going to be available, I think, on PACEnation's website as a recording. But it's kind of a version of the Energy Gang podcast, and clearly what we do on this podcast is we talk about energy. And that's really what I wanted to kick off with both of you on, is subject of how you got interested in energy. Obviously, both of you from kind of real estate backgrounds, now working at kind of the intersection of real estate and energy. Maybe, Laura, perhaps could you talk a little bit about your career? How did you get to be doing what you're doing now and working in PACE?
So it's a great question. I get the question a lot. Did you dream of becoming a CPACE lender when you were younger? And the answer is no. And frankly, CPACE wasn't available or even in inception when I started my career. I got my real estate license when I was a senior in high school and did many years of leasing. And then after college, I was Lehman's first analyst in London in their CMBS group. And I did securitization number 2. It was a thing. And then as Chris said earlier today, I think I see a lot of similarities today with where CPACE is relative to where CMBS was in the late 90s and early 2000s, especially in Europe. The product had been around, but the use case hadn't really taken off. And then suddenly when people figured out how to use it, the rest is history. From Lehman, I went to Tishman Speyer, I did acquisitions and development, and then after an MBA at Wharton, I spent nearly a decade at a firm called L&L Holding Company, building buildings, running capital raising, then left and bought a portfolio of value-add multi, and came back full circle to discovering CPACE. And at the time, I've sat in every seat. I had no idea what this was, and I was so fascinated by all the different use cases. And was very fortunate to have the background of having sat in each of the seats to appreciate why this would be so interesting. And at the time, really thought that the growth of PACE would come from Local Law 97 in New York. I'm a New Yorker. Northbridge is based in New York. And I was actually wrong. While there is very much the application of CPACE for small or larger balance retrofits, the use case is actually really getting fueled that we're seeing today, and we can talk about this later, as a really effective capital markets tool. The fact that if you are building to a high level of efficiency, which most institutional developers are doing, or you have already done that, you can qualify for a substantial amount of the stack to be CPACE eligible. And so you can really use this passive capital as a form of very effective financing for new construction and renovations, as well as refi and rescue capital. So it's really the culmination of being in all these different seats, being able to see how this product, which continues to innovate, and I think we're kind of in the very early innings of what is going to be a very long and I believe to be a very large potential growth product.
Yeah, absolutely. And just from an outsider's point of view, as I'm looking at it, it's one of the things I think is particularly interesting about this area is that it is, as you say, at that intersection of finance and real estate and energy, kind of, in quite complex ways, as you say, and a lot of kind of innovation going on. It's a new market that is developing. I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I had seen, I've actually built a number of LEED buildings. 425 Park, which is a building I built, which was the first well-certified building in New York. At the time, it was very clear to me that the intersection of real estate and sustainability, something I feel very strongly about, was really misunderstood to many and still is, as it's evolving, a scary topic for some, and it becomes binary. Either you really know about it or you don't know about it all. And I think PACE is a really interesting tool to kind of bridge that gap, to allow people to be able to afford the really important upgrades to buildings to make them more efficient, to be able to afford the heat pump over the PTAC unit, and instead of value engineering it, actually being able to now make their buildings more efficient and improve the collateral as well as improve their NOI for having much more effective, cash flows and benefit from the savings.
Absolutely. So what about you, Suhail? What's your story? How did you get interested in sustainability and energy?
Okay, I think it shows me. I'm an engineer by education. I studied electrical computer engineering. I moved here from Dubai when in my teens to go to university. So coming from a very different environment, obviously energy is very, very important over there just because of the climate, and obviously we're very oil dependent. Coming here and then going to the University of Wisconsin, which is extremely cold, saw that energy becomes even more important, right? So how many layers can you put on? Those cold winters really taught me something about energy and its importance. And then after that, I used to work for Palm. I'll date myself now. So back in the day, they made the Palm pilots. And after the company did well, I ended up investing in real estate. And that's how I got into real estate. I had no other fascination with real estate besides, hey, this can actually provide some capital gains for me. Being an engineer, I always wanted to doctor and figure out, okay, how do you make the math work? How do I make my property more desirable than the next, be it a residential or commercial asset? Because obviously you want to be competitive in the marketplace, right? So that's where I came from. In that regard, I ended up writing a book about profitable and sustainable real estate investing, profitable being the first word, right? So because if there's no profit, sustainability doesn't really matter to a lot of people, unfortunately. So how do we bring both people to the table and have that conversation? And sustainability, as Laura also mentioned, it's a lot more than just energy. So I'm not just focused on the energy part, but there's also water, material, indoor air quality, et cetera, location, and then the social impact and the governance. Those really breaking down as an engineer really fascinated me. And then that's what I ended up talking about, and then I teach the same thing at NYU as well. So that's where my research is going, and that's why I think this is a very, very important topic as we move towards not just electrification, but different uses and carbon capture and different, I don't think any source of energy is bad. It's just, okay, what trail are we leaving in our wake, right? So how do we address those issues, and how do we leave the world a better place than we currently are in, right? So that's what fascinates me about energy, and that's why I enjoy having these conversations. So,
absolutely. So, sorry, excuse me. So, it feels like, how to put this? There's a British expression which I think has come over here a bit. People talk about vibes, and people talk about a vibe shift with the election of President Donald Trump, with Republican control of Congress. There is a sense that sustainability perhaps is out of fashion now. Some circles, even it's a bit of a dirty word. ESG certainly is something where in ESG investing, and a lot of ideas around that have been weaponized and used against people trying to push for reductions in emissions and so on. And I wonder how much, if any, impact that's having on PACE in general, the kind of things you're doing, your business. I mean, Laura, what are you seeing at the moment? Do you think there's been a perceptible shift in the past 6 months or so?
Yes, the shift has actually been a very positive one, ironically. You know, when many people say to me, okay, well, now that the Trump is, is president, are you guys, out of business? And I actually say, no, we're busier than we ever have been. And I think there's a number of reasons for that. If I say to you, regardless of your political views, I can replace, you have a building in New York, or pick your city, with leaky windows, steam heat, and in the middle of February, in a very cold climate, you're now cranking up your HVAC. That impacts your bottom line and impacts you whether you're a tenant or a borrower, and certainly as a lender. And so I say to you, political views aside, if I can instead replace your windows, give you much more effective heating and really efficient air conditioning, and I'll pay for all of your hard and soft costs, 100% of people say, sign me up, what is that? So call that efficiency, call that sustainability, call that good business. That is a way to upgrade the buildings and create better collateral for borrower and lender. And so regardless of what's happening in the administration, we are seeing a need to upgrade the existing infrastructure because much of the infrastructure we have is outdated, and creating much more efficient HVAC heating, again, more efficient windows, not only attracts tenants to buildings, so will occupy the building, but also really creates a positive impact on the NOI. By reducing operating expenses, you increase your NOI. And so we're seeing that as a need. There's a need for people to upgrade buildings. There's also a need for people to refinance or adjust or work out their capital stack, because so many of these projects that are now hitting TCO or hit TCO within the last 2 years were started when SOFR was below 1. And so therefore, there have been cost overruns, there have been delays. The project, when initially created, is in a very different capital markets environment today. And so there's also a need for PACE to come in as a form of refi or rescue capital. So you have those two situations. So that's actually been creating a tremendous amount of business for us. And then on the PACE side, it's not about red versus blue. You know, Texas and California, two of the largest states, red and blue, it's bipartisan, are both, you know, two of the largest states for CPACE, you know, both are not blue, both are not red, but both actually are very effective places. And, you know, hats off to Texas for actually increasing the amount that is eligible and making the program that much more effective and increasing the LTV from 25 to 35% for making substantial changes in the structure so people can now actually have larger loans and get more financing. And so it is not about political you know, the politics driving the environment for us. It's actually the need for the upgrades to the infrastructure and the effective programs and changes that we're seeing across the country, regardless of politics, that are really making PACE more desirable than ever.
That is fascinating. Do you feel like you need to talk about PACE differently in different places and differently now from how you might have done a year ago, or is the messaging very similar?
You know, I think, look, there is definitely a change in how people approach the word ESG. We are a women-owned CPACE financing, so we are a national CPACE lender. We are a women-owned sustainable finance company. If that checks boxes for you, great, but that's not why someone's working with us. Same thing with CPACE. CPACE will help you create more efficient buildings or reduce the cost of capital in a capital stack. The reason you're going to use CPACE is because it's a mechanism for which you can create a more effective building or a more effective capital stack. And so I think the fact that it can check the ESG box, if needed, is a benefit, but that's not why people are seeking it out to begin with. And so I think it depends on what you're seeking. Are you a European investor that needs to check the ESG box? Fantastic. Are you you know, somebody who is really, you know, leaning the other way politically, and you just really want a very effective solution, you want to start your project? Both people can come from different locations, both people can come from different perspectives, but also achieve the same result based on the fact that they can actually achieve a number of things from a capital structuring or you know, affordability for a project. So I think there is definitely a lot more sensitivity to how you talk about things. Again, to my example of your window, your heating, and your air conditioning, call it what you want, you're creating a better building. But there's still a need for both, you know, the capital markets and the building.
So, Suhail, how do you see it? Are there new attitudes, new motives around sustainability, a new discourse as well? Or
yeah, so in terms of sustainability, ICLEI does a fantastic job on the ground level in terms of getting cities on board and doing local municipalities to do sustainability-related work. This is more of a human behavior conversation that I will have with you guys about, it's not necessarily just real estate, it's how we adapt or how do we accept new ideas. The first step is always conforming. We want to conform to what works. Okay, so in this instance, it would be, okay, you made a building better. Well, how do you measure that? How are you actually telling me that you are lowering my costs? Are you increasing my retention? Are you increasing my revenue? What are you doing? And then if I'm a leader in the space, I will hold on to my receipts and show this is how it's impacted my building after I've had whatever type of lending, be it CPACE or what have you. And then the followers in the industry will note and be like, this is amazing. You were able to make it sustainable and turn a profit? Fantastic, I'll conform with you. And then the market, be it real estate technology, could be lending, whatever instruments are there, will now define how do you comply with that conformance, right? So because they want to adapt to that market. So you have compliance first, you have you need to conform first, then you have comply, and then you have obedience, which comes in forms of regulation or law. You can't have it the other way around. And that's what I see a lot of it is happening. You're trying to enforce these things. You must use ESG, you must use that. And that's why people are like, I kind of don't like it. Administration's changed, let's get rid of that and get back to whatever we were doing. And that's why you have a lot of rollbacks and changes, which is unfortunate. You don't get an opportunity to see the benefit and value and profit and sustainability that can coexist just because of lack of either information, lack of education. I don't know what it is, but there's just a huge abyss that needs to be crossed, I think, in this. But yeah, regardless of administration, I think that's the core problem that I see a lot of times.
Yeah, so that is a fascinating point then. So how do you cross that abyss? Is it, you talked about maybe communication and getting people to understand the benefits better. Is it just that, or is it actually that the benefits actually need to be better, the case needs to be stronger?
The case needs to be stronger. I think the case is already strong, as Laura mentioned, right? So if I'm freezing and insulation or new windows can fix my problem, sign me up. But hey, can I actually document that? So obviously one thing is to go get a formal education, or the other way is actually just save your receipts, right? In your sustainability reports or what have you, showcase that, hey, this is how we performed last year and this is how we're performing this year, and our revenue numbers are up, and look at our ESG, our metrics, or what have you, standardize that, which is part of my research, standardizing those metrics, and then the leaders will adopt that, and then the industry folks make it easy for people to read and visualize and understand. And once that's going to be like, hey, you know what, I think I can make a couple of bucks doing this and at the same time have a social impact and improve my bottom line, sign me up.
Laura, what do you think?
I think it's hard to, was something, we've talked about before. I think it's hard to have a consistent baseline of how to quantify some of these things. How do you quantify that by changing your windows, you've made the savings you need? Even though you know that that's very important to attract tenants to buildings, keep tenants in your building, lower your operating expenses. And so I think it's important to have an idea of how to quantify the savings or the benefit, but there's also a benefit that I think is a little bit intangible. You have an outdated piece of real estate, you are upgrading your real estate. Whether you're upgrading it because you're being told by, certain local laws or national laws that you have to hit certain levels of, upgrade or level, reduction of carbon. The bigger thing becomes, how is that, effectively quantified and is there validity in how it's being quantified? And are two people who are quantifying, and are they using the same baseline? What is the algorithm? What is the model that you're using? And I think with technology, I think we're going to see changes, and it's rapidly changing as we speak, to create these baselines. But I think it's hard because you're not only changing the learning model, but you're also changing the technology at the same time. And so what is it that is accounting for that change? What's the catalyst? What is the constant that you're using as a baseline?
Yeah, so for me, it's always revenue, right? So can I retain my clients? Can I retain my tenants? And where I was losing people because of the quality of the product, if I can retain folks from turning over and leaving my building because of insulation, indoor air quality, be it acoustics, be it, it gets too windy, it gets too cold, it gets too hot, and if I can change that, that's a tangible number that I can see and I can document. Will it be the same across the buildings? No, but we have to start somewhere. You can't just be like, hey, I don't know where to start, so I'm not going to do anything. It's pretty straightforward in terms of emissions, revenue numbers we already publish. If you're a public company, I'm guessing you share that. Your OPEX numbers, you can share that. And then you can back it up with, hey, we made these investments, or we used CPACE, or we used green financing, sustainability linked loans, whatever, right? And now whoever is intrigued enough will go, okay, show me some details. Well, how did you actually pull this off? Oh, you actually use CPACE. Oh, very interesting use case, which we've discussed. And I thought those were fascinating. And now that becomes conformity. Then you move on to the next stage and ask for more money to be able to pull this off. And then we have the local law 97 and all that other stuff, not the other way around. That's how I think about it. Revenue is number one, right? Revenue is king. Because you'll keep doing this. Again, that's why the title of the book is Profitable and Sustainable, not the other way around. So.
I subscribe to profitable and sustainable, 100%. But I do think it's hard sometimes to identify what it is that is retaining the tenant. Is
Sure.
it because you've suddenly upgraded the windows, or is it you also took space away that was previously unusable and you created an amenity floor and suddenly that is attractive? Is it because you're retaining the tenant because your location is on top of a subway and most of your employees come through that subway? I think, I've leased space, I've built it.
Yep.
There's a lot of thought that goes into how do you bring people to a building and how do you keep them there? And I think one of the challenges that I've seen time and time again is what variable is it that's the leading indicator for why someone's staying? Is
100%.
it a single variable? Is it a basket of variables? No. Are those variables changing over time? People's use of space and going to the office, not going to the office, then going to the office, and these barbell changes are also another variable to lay on. I'm not saying that we shouldn't start somewhere, because you have to, and I think it's very easy, and certainly in real estate, the answer of because, like, why don't you do this? Because is totally acceptable. No, in my mind, is where the conversation begins, and so if you're saying, well, not necessarily, then there's a way around it. But generally, for most people in real estate, we don't do something because it's too hard.
Did you just set me up? This was amazing. So
no, I don't know where you're going with that. But my view is, as a result, I think adoption's important, but I think it's also hard to, where do you start and what is the lowest common denominator that people can agree to? It's something actually we had a very intriguing conversation at lunch about.
Yeah, so I think this is what's very important, right? So a lot of folks will connect sustainability or associate sustainability with just energy. They'll go as far as water. That's it, right? So, but what we have to do as an industry or as people trying to improve this industry is make sure that it's granular, more granular than that. And that's why reporting becomes very important. You have water, indoor air quality, acoustics, location, transportation, sustainable sites. You've got social impact, how are you treating your workers, what are you doing about cybersecurity, all those things. And now it becomes doubly material to your stakeholders. And depending on whether you're running an office, whether it's residential, whether it's industrial, self-storage, whatever, those metrics will matter depending on the sector itself. It has to be sector specific, and that's why we have to get more granular and report on those. Because if I say, oh, my people are staying because of my amazing windows that I installed in a residential building, I compare that to an office, it's apples to oranges. People are going to be like, you're nuts. This study of sustainability stuff doesn't work. This ESG is just gibberish that you've made up. That's why we need more granularity. Just the same way we have financial reports. You need reporting which is granular at that level. And so if someone wants to go and say, hey, PACE made this impact, fantastic. I think I'm going to back this asset provider, this asset operator. So I think that intelligence can be quantified. Go ahead.
So I was wondering if this relates to the conversation we were having on our planning call for this session a couple of days ago about savings to investment ratios. And again, this question of, within PACE, what can you do to essentially quantify the benefits, right? And demonstrate that the benefits are real. I know, Laura, you had some issues about SARs and other
strong thoughts.
Right. Well, go on. Do you want to share those then? And am I right in thinking, in a way, it's part of that same debate because it's all about the question of, what can you prove? As you say, are you keeping the receipts? What can you demonstrate?
Look, I think in something actually we talked about with some people I had lunch with, and it was really fascinating to hear the different perspectives of, why was SIR there? Why was SIR not part of programs? What's the intent? And I think, the intent is for the SIR is you want somebody to be able to afford the geothermal plant, but the upfront cost is cost prohibitive, even if the payback period is very short. People don't, if you can look at something, on a multiple basis, and it could be greater than one, but the actual cash outflow before you get the cash inflow will make it such that people cannot afford some of the things. And for much of my career, I sat at a table with a red pen, value engineering things I really wanted because I couldn't justify the ROI on them. There wasn't PACE to use. PACE didn't exist at this point, and not even in the period. And we had to value engineer things that we knew would create a better building, we knew would actually be really important, but we did not have the mechanism or the ability to quantify the savings to justify why we should be able to include those things. And therefore, the buildings, great buildings, I stand by them, but some of the things that would have made them even more efficient are not part of those buildings today. And so I think that when you think about the SIR, the intent is really important, but I think in reality, it becomes really difficult. For example, in New York City, the cost of labor and materials is so high that you're never going to get greater than a 1 SIR on windows. It just doesn't happen. It's not going to happen. And so I think that you have to keep the SIR in mind when you're thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve. And in my mind, having been a developer for a long time, I view it as, if you want 5 elements in a building, you don't want to disincentivize somebody so that it becomes, well, if it's just too hard to get them and I have to get all 5, I'm just going to do 0. It's just easier not to do it. My mind is, well, actually, if we can get 2 of those 5 elements, that's beneficial for everybody because at least we're getting something. It's very binary. We're going to get a better building and allow people to get the heat pump over the PTAC unit, really create a more efficient, curtain wall system that will benefit the building for resiliency purposes and potentially, and hopefully, also reduce their insurance costs. You don't want to make it so onerous that somebody is going to say, you know what, to heck with this. It's just too hard. It's just too complicated. Well, I'd like to get these things. I'm not going to achieve it, so I'm going to go in a different direction. So I think that, and again, hats off to some of the newer programs and actually existing programs who are continually looking at what's important, how they will size, what the technical requirements are, because it becomes very much of a sense, and a lot of the program administrators, I'm really impressed with how thoughtful they are and how commercial they try to be about creating effective programs so people can actually, make their buildings more efficient and also get the capital to make that happen.
And just to be clear about what you're saying here then, I mean, you might think if the SIR on windows in New York City is less than 1, you would ask the question, well, why should you actually spend money on those new windows then? I mean, is there an argument for why you should?
Well, again, I think that there's the reality of you want to create a better building. You know that your operating expenses will be reduced, but if you have to do it within the confines of a specific SIR, and we'll take New York and windows out of this, but just generally speaking, if you don't achieve it, then it becomes binary. Then you can't get the PACE financing. And that's not the goal. The goal is to allow people to achieve more efficient measures. So my view is that, and what we're seeing, and again, a lot of this does come down to education. So many people out there have built or are building buildings to or better than code, and the code keeps getting more stringent as as the building codes kind of are catching up with some of the environmental concerns that we have as it relates to hurricane resiliency, seismic resiliency, and certain levels of building. And as a result, what people don't realize is you don't have to be passive house or net zero to be able to be PACE eligible. We love that. That's great. If you are a passive house net zero building, you're generally going to qualify for just about everything in every program. However, you also can qualify in most programs if you're building to a certain level, which most institutional investors are doing anyway. And I think there's a general thought out there that people who even are building these great buildings don't realize that they qualify because they think they have to be something that they're never going to achieve. And so I think there's that and the idea of this SIR that you're never going to achieve. It just creates this general view that it's insurmountable. It's something I can never achieve, so why try it? As opposed to, well, hold on a second. You're doing all of these things, you qualify, and while we're at it, we can make your building better. And that's generally the viewpoint that we come to of, let us make each building much more effective or efficient. Let's make your capital stack more efficient because you've already done these elements, and really trying to translate and demystify so much of the confusion that's out there.
So what do you think about this, Suhail, on this question of SIR requirements?
I think the use case that Laura is describing is very unique. It's an edge case. It's very amazing what they're doing. But again, for resiliency, my take is that that's probabilistic. You have operational expenses which show up every month. A hurricane may or may not show up, or tornado may or may not show up. But I still have utility bills every month. I still have water bills every month. And so if I can do that through PACE financing or any other mechanism to lower those numbers, obviously I'll run a more efficient building. So yes, this is a great use case. My only concern with SIR, it's not as serious as getting rid of DSCR. It's important that we remember that PACE is helping building owners to retrofit or construct new buildings and do other things. And now in this retroactive capitalization, or pulling money out when they really need it, I think this is an incredible opportunity for all the lenders, including Laura's organization, to document are those energy improvements that you have invested in, are they actually doing what they were promised to do? Someone promised you that, hey, you'll install these windows, you install this geothermal system, what have you, your bills will be lower and you will run a more efficient building. Can we document that? Because once the interest rates come back down, this should not just be another, when they do, right? When the interest rates do come back down, it shouldn't just be like, oh yeah, PACE, that was a plugin, right? That we used, it was just filling the gap at that point. It should go back to allowing, hey, we've documented this. You can actually really save money or increase tenant retention or whatever your metrics are. This is the opportunity for PACE right now to be able to save those receipts just because of where we are or we happen to be in the industry.
So I would beg to differ a bit. You can still have savings, you just might not be at a 1.0 SIR.
Fine.
Well, not fine, because then you're not going to be able to get the financing that would have enabled you to get those savings. So I think it becomes really important to understand what are the inputs going into the SIR. Certain programs have been very creative about ways to keep the integrity of what it is that they are trying to do and be realistic about the reality of how people build and kind of bridge the gap. But I think generally speaking, if we talk about an SIR of a 1.0 and understanding that when you're building a larger building in a major market, it's going to be very challenging to achieve that when you have very, very stringent requirements. And then it becomes binary. No, I'm not going to get PACE financing, and I'm going to go with a different lender, and I'm probably going to value engineer some of the things that I otherwise would have had to incorporate into my deal with CPACE.
Okay, so the reason I said fine with SIR is not there because I have an appraisal background, okay? So I used to appraise property as well, just to see valuation. And I've seen people put a swimming pool where it didn't exist for another $500, okay? This was in 2008. So I understand the SIR math works. There's no real framework at the federal level or any level. It's very localized. So if I have my savings documented, depending on what discount rates I'm using and what math I'm using, I can make up any number. So there's imaginary engineering happening all the time, right? So that's why I say, okay, if you want to get rid of that, fine. I'm not going to control the 50 states and how they implement it. But what I can do is put some guardrails around it so that what it's intended to do, or what it was intended to do, can come back and thrive. That's all I'm saying. So will I be able to control a government or a state saying that, no, we don't care about SIR? No, I don't have that capacity. But can we work with that and still do what we are supposed to do as good builders? I think so.
Yeah, but I think instead of an SIR, what I think is actually more effective in many of the programs is if you build to this level of code, you are able to achieve the financing. And what's inherent in that is in that level of code, there are already certain measures and certain levels of certain types of glass, certain types of plumbing and HVAC that are required in order to achieve that designation. And so instead of saying SIR and there could be spikes in employment and underlying rates and therefore costs go up and insurance and that, we are in a very circular economy. And so, rising inflation also impacts construction costs. Mm-hmm. that will impact the SIR, whereas instead, if you're saying, hi, you need to build to this level or 5% better than this level, it's very clear as to what that is. People can understand what they need to do, and underlying what's the requirement to get to that level are certain things that we all want from a sustainability and efficiency perspective.
I'm not going to drop any names on any certifications, but some buildings have the highest level of certifications of certain kind, right? And residential buildings, you can hear your neighbor sneezing, okay? And this is supposed to be one of the best built buildings with platinum certification or what have you, and WELL certification, what have you. Is that what the tenant or occupant wants? So building to code, yes, they've checked all the boxes, but how do you actually feel and how is it operating? Again, coming back to my original point, is very important in this, because that's the report card. Just the same way that maybe most of you in the room go get an annual health checkup. What's your cholesterol? What's your blood pressure? We need to have those for buildings. And if that also shows along the way how it was financed, I think it will make a much stronger case for PACE in the future than just assuming that, yes, of course, because we check some boxes for code, it should work, right? It doesn't.
So, Laura, do you want one more thought on that issue? Because I want to move on away from this a little bit and talk more broadly. But go on.
Yeah, I think we're kind of talking about two different things. I'm talking about the SIR being a limiting, being more of a limiting factor as opposed to catalyst for adoption of PACE and growth, and therefore adoption of more effective buildings. Mm-hmm. I'm like in every state, each program has certain technical requirements that have to be met. So it's not just saying, oh, without the SIR, go build whatever you want. Not so, and the technical requirements take that into account. What I'm saying is, let's be practical about what it is that we're really trying to achieve, because the SIR might not be, and frankly, I don't think is the right mechanism, and there can be other things such as a certain level or better than level of code that would be encompassing of all the things we're trying to achieve. And what you're saying is that you'd like to have more ongoing testing.
Yes.
To say, okay, well, if you actually had this amount of savings, prove that.
Absolutely.
Excellent. There you go. A certain amount of agreement, at least, on this one. So as I was saying, I wanted to get on to another subject, which is the question of using PACE financing to invest in resilience. And you touched on it a little bit, but I'm interested to hear, apart from anything else, just how widespread it is at the moment, how much of it is going on. Something we talk about quite a bit on the Energy Gang, we've been talking about quite a bit in recent months, is this question of climate adaptation and the sense that adaptation and resilience is kind of rising up everybody's agenda, in particular as it becomes increasingly clear that we're not going to meet the climate goals of the Paris Agreement and so on. There was a conference which actually looked very interesting here in New York City just over the past couple of days, specifically focusing on this question of climate adaptation. So there is, I think it's very widely agreed, a need to get more finance to flow towards resilience. How good of a mechanism for doing that is PACE?
Well, look, I think PACE is an exceptional, and many of the programs are now becoming CPACE-er, with R being resiliency programs. What people that may not realize when we talk to them, on the West Coast, seismic resiliency that's required by code is PACE eligible. The hard and soft costs for upgrading a building or building a new one and incorporating the seismic resiliency is very expensive. And by the same measure, in Florida, hurricane resiliency is now incorporated into the PACE program, and that, again, a more effective curtain wall is, not only good business, but it's also something that we can also finance. And so I think that, look, the world's not getting any better, and therefore we have to adopt. First of all, we should take strides to make it better if we can, but also to adopt the infrastructure and the built environment to be able to adapt to an ever-changing landscape of, climate and climate change. And so having that ability to finance these things to help be a mechanism and a tool for people to actively upgrade the built environment to protect against now and future challenges, I think is really important and very, much the heart, the intent of PACE, and a very effective use case for how we can, and help people.
Right. So, what do you think?
I think it's very amazing that Laura is filling that need or that gap. My analogy for this is usually when 3M's glue came out, it wasn't intended for Post-it notes, but now it's being used for Post-it notes, right? So I think that's the evolution of PACE. Obviously, we'll say, we'll recognize it for what it's doing. And I think it's really amazing that if PACE has to evolve in that regard and they're filling that need, that's fantastic. And it's important that we do these things, right? Even if these things are probabilistic, someone has to go out and do these, because otherwise we'll have to keep relocating to different areas after a tornado or a hurricane. How do we keep building back, right? It becomes very expensive. So this is a cheaper way out, provided that we can, again, prove in some instances that, hey, the damage that was caused, just like how I believe someone else was talking at lunch about the fires in Los Angeles. Like some homes are still standing because they have certain external properties, which didn't hurt the properties, but the other one, everything around them is gone, right? So, but do you really want to live in that community? That becomes the other question, right? You're the only house standing. So how do we do that for communities? That's the scale part.
I lived through Sandy, and a building in New York City changed after that when we realized that having a lot of your infrastructure in the basement, especially in a flood zone, is probably not the best idea, and therefore people had to raise it, above grade, and changed how you thought about buildings. Same thing after 9/11, and with the firefighters and putting in water at every, certain metrics and floors and for egress, and just reacting to some of the natural disasters and events that we've had to face. I think it actually is really important to have it be incorporated into PACE, because it's very much, again, as I said, the intent of what we're trying to do, build more efficient, resilient buildings for now and going forward.
And are you working at all with the insurance industry on this? Because when I think about it, Suhail, as you say, that oftentimes you're thinking about these sort of catastrophic risks, which are infrequent but very high impact events, and the sort of the connection between those high-impact events and regular, predictable financial flows is the insurance industry. Yep. Are there insurance benefits available here? Could they be more in the future, do you think? Are there ways that this relationship could evolve?
So we actually have spoken to some people in the insurance industry, and some of the large insurers are actually doing a really amazing job of trying to be proactive and working with some of their key clients to identify the risks and help them. If there's anyone out there, I welcome talking to you as well, because I think it's a really, something we actually hadn't spoken about before, but I think there's a very interesting kind of symbiotic relationship. We are aligned in what we're trying to achieve, and this is a very effective tool that can be used in tandem with insurance carriers to help incentivize their clients to help keep them out of claims.
Right.
Yeah, I think if there's a delta which can be proven over time, I think it will definitely improve insurance rates. At least it should. It should be documented. It should be, these are the tangible benefits. Why are my rates still high?
Yeah, indeed. So a couple of other issues I'm very keen to get to. One is the question of capital markets. You mentioned something about changing conditions in capital markets. Obviously, things are very different now from where we were, let's say, 4 years ago. And I haven't actually checked the bond market today, but I see that rate on the 30-year heading up towards 5%. Have you looked today?
It's no longer sub 4.
Yeah, indeed.
Look, SOFR is not below 1, and I think that what's been interesting to us, again, I started my career in CMBS during the earliest securitizations, and it's actually the lack of CMBS that's been ironically fueling the growth of CPACE. And it's really what we're seeing is the lack of liquidity and tremendous volatility has really kind of diverted people's attention to PACE. And as I said earlier, people really didn't, think, if people think, okay, because of the name sometimes, commercial property assessed clean energy, I'm sitting in New York City looking around, where am I finding, solar panels? And then you realize, well, actually, there are so many other components that go into making efficient, effective, sustainable buildings. So people, immediately discount this as a product they could use, whereas now I think what's happened is, as we've had, I think we've actually probably surpassed the 10 billion of CPACE since inception, and great deals are getting done. It was only in 2023 that a 9-figure CPACE deal was done, and now and there's no reason more can't, and 20% year-over-year growth. Like there's so much growth that this is now not a brand new product. Certainly not in the small balance, but also in the institutional market, and we play in the large scale, kind of north of $10 million, and the bigger the better for PACE space, that this is becoming much more of a mainstream product and one that people can look to, whether for, as a replacement for the banks who've been pulling back because of the lack of liquidity. But what we're also seeing is as a really effective capital markets tool for refi and rescue capital, in that if you've already built your building, in most markets, there's a 3-year look back from TCO. Hawaii is 5, but therefore, which is great, so thank you, Glenn. But 3 years from TCO, so if you've completed a building at some point in 22 or 23, and you've now coming up upon whether it's a maturity or an extension of your initial maturity, and you are not necessarily stabilized, we're seeing a tremendous amount of interest, and frankly, even in the multifamily space, but across the board in all asset classes, of being able to come in retroactively and use our capital to pay down a lender, blend and extend, and then allow them time to stabilize. And then the borrower has the option of keeping us on or taking us off. So we're becoming an alternative to a bridge lending product to really help for that, to give people credit for the work that they have done to already build these very effective buildings, but also to be used as a way to give people time to stabilize the asset. And so we're creating, 3, 5, 7, 10-year shorter duration maturities of these fixed rate, accrual, interest-only pieces of paper that can be used in a very effective way. And it can either be part of a refi, we're coming in as new refis to take out existing loans, or coming in not only to, in an office building, you can pay down the lender, reduce their at-risk dollars, blend and extend, as well as be that source of capital for good news dollars for TIs and LCs. Like a 70% leased office building is maybe covering debt service but is not yet in a position that it can be fully refied or sold. And the borrower's not gonna have the capital to put in. The lender probably doesn't wanna foreclose, but also doesn't wanna put more dollars in. And so people are finding, well, hold on a second. I can qualify for PACE. I can take your dollars and pay down the lender and also be the way to bring the tenants in and then be passive and really help right the ship. We're seeing, there's a $998 billion, with a B, $1 billion wall of maturities this year, and goes up to $1.27 trillion in 27. There's tremendous amount of loans coming due in this year, next year, and the year after. And because of the look back, because of the work that's being done, as well as some of the dollars needed to help re-tenant buildings, or again, even just pay debt service and put reserves of the property, PACE is becoming a really effective capital markets tool and solution for just about every asset class.
Those numbers are amazing, aren't they? So,
Yeah.
100 billion here, there's that saying 100 billion here, 100 billion there. Pretty soon you're talking real money. It is, it adds up, doesn't it? It all adds up. Yeah.
It all adds up. And actually further, what's interesting is, there's about a $500 billion hole if you remove some of the, traditional commercial banks from that has to be replaced with private capital. And the fixed rate, long-term passive nature of PACE, many people, borrowers, brokers, lenders are coming to us saying, well, hold on a second, maybe we should talk, and you're kind of the tool I didn't know I could access, and now I think is fantastic, and let's do more.
So give us a number then of that $1 trillion-ish of maturities that the industry is moving towards. How much could be refinanced or in some way covered by PACE?
A lot.
Excellent. That's a very good number. Suhail, what do you think about this? When you hear about this and you think about the role of PACE in addressing this wall of maturities, do you think this is a good thing? Is this an appropriate use of this money?
See, with property taxes, if the values drop in the market, I can go back to the assessor's office and be like, listen, the market isn't and I can hire an appraiser to do that, and the valuation, and my taxes can come down. The thing we need to be cautious about with CPACE is now it tags on, and I don't think you can negotiate that number down. You've taken the money and you've gone home, right? And the one thing about the TCO being looked back is 3 years, and now she's mentioning 5 years. It's fantastic for if you're looking to borrow. The only concern I would have, or a caution I would have, I'm supportive of the program. It's just if you haven't been able to stabilize the asset in 3 years or in the last 5 years, are you just kicking the can down the road? Or do you actually have an inherent problem in the building? That would be my biggest concern. Because if we want this to be adopted by the biggest lenders or institutional lenders, you need to make sure that they feel comfortable and safe, especially in states like Nevada or Utah. I believe they have lien priority, super lien priority, right? So where are they in the waterfall for foreclosure? That's something obviously a big concern for them. And now if that number stays ballooned, regardless of how the building is performing or how the economy is performing, I can't negotiate that tax number down or the assessment number down. What do I do? That's my only word of caution there. That's why getting rid of the SIR and all that, it's fantastic. Well, what guardrails have you put in place to make sure that, okay, you couldn't do it in the last 5 years. Are you going to actually perform in the next 5?
So what I think that we're seeing in terms of these TCO takeouts is that the asset's just been completed, but has not yet had the time to lease up, to stabilize. A perfect example is a borrower came to us and said, I have a loan maturity. I'm literally finishing TCO in June, and I have a loan maturity June 30th. So they haven't had the time to stabilize. They haven't had the time to lease. And so as a result, they now need the time to bring tenants into the building and take the time to stabilize. It may take them 12, 24, 36 months. And that's where I think the structural nature of PACE is a really great solution. We can accrue for that first year, call it 2 years. Then we can go interest only for 5 more. And so within that, let's just say it's a 3-1-1. So within those first 3 years and even 5 years, from the lender's perspective, we're allowing them to get all the cash flow. We've already paid our interest, which is getting paid once or twice a year for that first even 24-month period. So now the asset has maximum cash flow coming to the mortgage. The amount of PACE is not, there's zero payment for PACE in the first 12 months or 24 months. And then after that, it's an interest-only payment for the next 3 years of this 5-year loan. We're not talking about a P&I. There's no balloon payment. And so in the reality, our payment is actually, call it 6 to 7% of the total capital stack. It's not like we are 90% leveraged and suddenly not only are taxes and taxes going up, values going down, and you're burdened by this amount. I think it's actually rather the opposite. It's such a small amount relative to the outstanding principal balance that when you quantify the amount that's actually due in any period of time, you want to think, okay, well, if everyone says your $20 million loan is ahead of me, well, it might only be $1 million or $2 million of interest payment that's actually ahead. I don't have the ability to accelerate my outstanding principal balance. And so I think it's understanding where you are at each point in time that rather, I think this could be I know it's a really effective solution for many of these assets, not saying that, oh, you haven't stabilized in the last 5 years, but rather you haven't had the chance to, or you're only stabilizing and you built this building when SOFR was below 1. You're now at negative leverage in terms of where the market is for cap rates and the cost of capital. The alternative for getting capital has become so much more expensive because the debt funds that rely on, warehouse lines, those prices have gone out. The banks are pulling back because whether it's, liquidity issues or the amount of allocation to asset classes, that's changed. And you have this perfect storm of there's not enough capital in the market and the cost has become more expensive. So if we can create something structurally that everyone understands the fixed nature, the payment for each period of time, and we don't have the ability to accelerate, we actually allow people this change of being able to get out of a situation, not maybe it is kick the can, but not kick the can in a bad way, kick the can in a way that actually allows the asset and the borrower and lender to get their money back, borrower to keep the asset to stabilize, and then they can figure out if they want to keep the PACE on or not.
Suhail, final thought for you.
Just keep your receipts. And that's what I would say. That's my only thought. This is an incredible opportunity. Laura's doing an incredible job. The way the industry is evolving, just the conversations that I've heard from today as well, the use cases are so brilliant, and that's where the innovation thrives, right? And you want to make an omelet, you're going to break some eggs, right? It's fine. But keep the receipts, just because the next generation will want them when better interest rates arrive. We should be able to leverage PACE for energy efficiency, resiliency, water efficiency, all those things as well, and do all the wonderful things that we are doing today.
Well, thanks very much indeed. Unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. We're out of time. This conversation absolutely could go on all afternoon, but they might get annoyed with us if it did. But it's been a fantastic discussion. Thanks both very much indeed. Really enjoyed talking to you both. Really learned a lot as well. Hope you in the audience have all enjoyed it a lot as well. For now, they're going to say thank you, Suhail. Thank you, Laura. Thanks very much to PACENation for inviting the Energy Gang to be part of this event here today. I think you'll be able to listen again if you want, or want to share it with anyone. It's going to be available on the PACENation website, and please do tune in to the Energy Gang wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, goodbye.